morning. Welcome to this service celebrating the life of our friend Alan Cagle. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Susie Bjork, and I am the associate pastor here at Shore Church, where Alan was a longtime member. On behalf of both our church community and Alan's family, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Just a couple of hospitality items before we begin. I think we've talked to most of you, but if you parked in the parking lot across the street, please be sure to pick up a parking permit to place in the dashboard of your car if you haven't already. If you need a restroom, there are some over here in the hallway, and there's more on the other side of the fellowship hall as well. And as you'll see in your memorial bulletin, you are invited to join us in our fellowship hall, which is just right next door over here, for a reception immediately following the service. And I do encourage you, please stick around for some refreshments. There's plenty to eat, a slideshow of some photos of Alan and some photos that he took that Sharon beautifully put together. You'll want to see that. And a chance to continue to share your memories of Alan with one another. Friends, we are gathered here today in the protective shelter of God's abundant and ever-present love to remember, honor, and celebrate the life of our friend Alan. I invite you now to turn in your memorial bulletin to our invocation. And please join with me in one voice as we pray. Creator and provider God, we gather on this day to remember and give thanks for Alan's life here on earth. And we now entrust this faithful and kind man to peaceful rest in your eternal care. We give you thanks for the person Alan was in this life and how abundantly he blessed the lives of those he knew and loved. May our prayers and remembrances this day bring strength and comfort to his family, friends, and all who love him. And may all gathered here experience your steadfast love today and all days. Amen.
Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may also be. And you know the way to the place where I am going. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid.
Thank you, Michael. Alan Bruce Cagle was born to Calvin and Inga Cagle in Whittier, California on July 12, 1943. All these years, and I didn't know that Alan was a July baby too. I should have asked earlier, because that's my birth month as well. When he was 7 years old, the family moved to the oil fields of rural Kern County, but Alan would later return to Whittier. In 1965, Alan received his bachelor's degree from Stanford University, and in 1969, his medical degree from the University of California, San Francisco. After completing his internship and residency, he joined the pathology department at Presbyterian Intercommunity Hospital and the pathology laboratory of Whittier in 1973. One of Alan's responsibilities during his career there was to oversee the blood donation center. He saw the need for life-saving blood firsthand and donated himself regularly, probably about 40 units of blood and 20 units of platelets. Alan surely saved lives. After his retirement from medicine in 1998, Alan continued to pursue his creative passions of musical theater, you heard that lovely selection from Carousel, choral music, and photography. He also served in multiple volunteer positions with quite a few arts organizations and here at Bayshore Church too. As we were preparing this service, we reached out to our pastor emeritus, the Reverend Charles Ensley, to see if he would like to offer a remembrance of Alan, as he and his wife Peggy were close friends for many years. He did, of course, so I'd like to read that to you now. Some 18 years ago, maybe more, when Alan was singing with the William Hall Chorale in Orange County, someone invited him to come sing the Lenten cantata at Bayshore Church. Alan agreed just to sing that cantata. So he drove down from Whittier Thursday nights to rehearsals, as well as to sing on Sunday mornings, as the choir often rehearsed some of those selections before worship. So Alan came just to sing in the cantata. But, as we probably all know, after the Lenten cantata, he liked the music, the choir, the music director, and all of it. So he decided to stay and sing at Easter, just Easter. But, as we all know, he began his tenure of a dozen or more so years singing in the choir, Lenten and Christmas cantatas, and many Sunday mornings, helping to lead a solid tenor section in the Bayshore Chancel Choir. But wait, there's more. It seemed Bayshore needed a new church treasurer at some point. And by that time, Alan had joined the church as a member, and so he offered to take on that task. And it is not a light responsibility, I will say. He had an office over in the Christian Ed wing, where he came down from Whittier once a week to write checks, balance the books, post all the weekly pledges and offerings. He was as precise and dedicated in his role as a treasurer as he had been in his medical profession as a pathologist. And he made an additional drive down once a month to give the treasurer's report to the Board of Stewards meeting. Charlie says, Alan and I shared an affinity for wearing Joseph A. Bank button-down shirts. When I strolled over to his office, most weeks we would chuckle to see if one or the other of us was wearing one. Alan and I were both fanatics about the care of our cars. Yes, that is true. I can attest to that. Alan would buy a new Infiniti about every 3 years. A new one would show up in the church parking lot in silver or gray, not too much different from the one he just traded in, so I kidded him about whether he ever had to buy new tires. Alan loved the theater. He attended musical theater at Long Beach Community Playhouse, Carpenter Center, and serious plays at Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles. Not to mention his long-standing annual subscription to the Shakespeare Festival in Ashland, Oregon, attending 7 to 10 plays, sometimes 2 a day. That's a lot of Shakespeare. On his advice, we attended one summer the same week that he was there. We stayed at his favorite hotel, which offered late-night post-theater snacks for theater goers so they could congregate and discuss the play if they wished. Alan, as we know, was also a skilled amateur photographer. He attended photo workshops around the country with that same precise dedication required of a pathologist. Many of those workshops had a specific focus: close-ups, reflective pictures, flowers, barns, etc. All of those photos are framed at our home. There is a shot of colored silk spools from an abandoned mill in Baltimore. Flowers on the front porch of a classic townhome in Charlotte, North Carolina. A barn perfectly reflected in the pond next to it. One time when we were at a photo exhibit of his works at Community Playhouse, my wife Peggy has an affinity for barns, having grown up in upstate New York. We were standing in front of a large photo of an abandoned tobacco barn in North Carolina. Alan came up behind us and quietly said, "Don't buy it, I'll make you a print." His most memorable gift to us came just before I retired. He had so many pictures in his Whittier home that he had to take some down to put others up. Knowing Peggy's love of barns, he offered us a nearly 4-foot wide framed watercolor of an abandoned barn, and it now hangs spotlighted over our fireplace mantel. All of the other photos of his hang in our living and dining room. Memories of Alan surround us. After I retired in 2013 and we moved to Santa Rosa, when we made occasional trips back to Long Beach, we usually got in touch with Alan and had lunch or dinner. When he eventually moved north to an independent living retirement home in Santa Rosa, he had us over for lunch in its luxurious dining room, and then we toured his 3-bedroom apartment. Alan had good taste. One time we invited him back to our home for lunch, but he called the day of the lunch to decline. We know that sometimes Alan had dark times too. Last October, we planned a car trip north to Portland, Oregon to visit our older daughter, Emily. By then, Alan had moved north to a retirement village in Medford, Oregon to be near his 2 sisters, who had also retired from California to Oregon. We made arrangements to stay overnight in a hotel and meet him for dinner, but somewhere after Reading, Peggy texted him to tell him when we would arrive, and he texted back and begged off, saying he didn't feel well. He was short of breath and he had a doctor's appointment. Could we possibly meet with him on our way home? Sadly, we were driving straight back home the next week and couldn't see him. That might have been the last time we would have seen our dear friend Alan. I need only pick out a Joseph A. Bank button-down shirt, go to a theater performance, or look around at the artwork on my living room walls. And Alan's memory and his gifts and his talents will always surround us. We won't pass through Medford without thinking of him just east of Interstate 5. And I pray that Alan is finally at peace and rest in the light of God's presence. Many of the things that Charlie mentioned are what I remember about Alan too, although not the shirts, they had that going on. But Alan's love of music, absolute love of music, his passion for photography, which he did share with me from time to time. He had just such a wonderful eye and a really unique ability to capture simple things. I remember he got some shots of the stained glass windows, the light shining through on the pews in here, and they were just glorious. Simple things, simple beauty. I remember his dedication, his organization, his attention to detail as our treasurer. I never had to worry too much about whether my reimbursements were correct. He double-checked them for me, which was awesome. You know, Alan also served on the search committees, both for my position, over 13 years ago now, and for our current senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Dave Clark. And all of these volunteer positions, that treasurer position and these search committee positions, are big time commitments. These are not for the faint of heart. These are big time commitments that involve a lot of detailed work. It is clear to me, given all of the involvement that Alan was in all sorts of organizations, that volunteer service was something that was very important to him, and he dedicated his years of retirement to it. And those many organizations, including us, surely benefited from his commitment and his skills, which were many. Personally, I will always remember Alan's best qualities that I saw. He was kind, he was gentle, he was quietly witty. I loved that he had an email address that was snoopdocky@aol.com. Thought that was hilarious. Alan was dedicated to any task that he put his brilliant mind to. And Alan was profoundly creative and sensitive to the beauty of the world surrounding him. And Alan was deeply faithful. I am so grateful to have known him. I'd like to invite Sharon forward now to offer some words.
Good morning. On behalf of our sister Frances and our entire family, I'd like to welcome you here again, as Susie did, and thank you for coming to honor Alan's life with us. I'd like to start off by reading a few of Alan's own words that I found as I was going through his things. As my niece reminded me, this is a way for those of you who knew him later to know where he came from and to honor our parents a little bit. In how he came to be the man that you all know. The letter I'll read is from a letter that was written to our parents in June 1969, the week he graduated from UCSF Medical School. It was his attention to detail, it was a 6-page, single-spaced letter, written front and back so that it was 3 pieces of paper so that he wouldn't have to put an extra stamp on the envelope. But it was almost like he was carrying on a conversation with our parents. It gave the daily details, what he watched on TV, that the laundry had to be done, that Frances came over and picked up his laundry. It was just lovely to read it. I'm not reading the whole 6 pages to you, but I wanted to read the last 2 paragraphs of the letter, as I said, the week before he graduated from medical school. And Pastor Susie has promised to help me if I can't get through it. Well, I guess that about winds up this final chapter of the trials and tribulations of a student in medical school. Though I'm not much good at putting emotions down on paper, I'm even worse when it comes to expressing them face to face, since I always get all teary-eyed and choked up. So perhaps this is the appropriate place to at least start thanking you for all you've done for me and put up with these past 8 years. Being the silent type that I am, I haven't very often told you how much I appreciate all the sacrifices you have made on my behalf, all the support, both financial and emotional, that you've given me, and goodness knows what else. I could go on listing things for pages and pages, but then I'd have to put another stamp on this letter, and I couldn't bear to do that. Not a day has gone by since I left home for school that I haven't thought of all of you and all the things you have had to give up for me, all the changes and plans that have been made necessary by me. I do appreciate it more than you will ever know. I certainly am not ashamed of my humble background. If anything, it means just that much more to have gotten this far, coming from the small town we have called home for the last 20 years. So, as we approach the momentous day so near in the future, I want you to know that the MD degree which will be placed in my hands belongs as much to you as it does to me. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, your eternally grateful son, Alan. And now, from his medical career, I would like to invite up his dear friend and right-hand person, Susie Bezak.
I was fine until a minute ago. I wasn't going to cry. I was Dr. Cagle's secretary from the early 80s until he retired. I always referred to him as Dr. Cagle, even though he asked me to call him Alan. Sometimes I did call him ABC, but not often. He was the doctor, always. Over the years, though, he did get some nicknames. ABC, Alan Bruce Cagle. The Tall Tenor. Snoop Docky, thanks to Judy and Glenda. Dr. Mushroom, I'm not going to explain that one. And my favorite, Chief Black Cloud. Chief Black Cloud, because it always hit the fan when he was on call. And he called me Princess Rain in the Face. When I first met him, I thought he was a quiet, very focused pathologist, and he was, but he was so much more. He had a dry sense of humor that would lighten up a stressful day. He knew I liked Snicker bars. One morning I walked into my office and found over, well, I counted 30 Snickers hidden all over my office. And they were the big bars. He would ask me to come in his office, and I never knew what to expect. One of my fondest memories, is when I walked in one day. He's sitting there with a very serious look on his face, a Dick Tracy type of hat on, and these. Another nickname, Dr. Groucho. This became a running long joke over the years. Okay, sorry. Okay. He was gifted in many areas. He's an outstanding pathologist, just to name one. We loved watching him sing with the William Hall Chorale and other choirs. We attended numerous concerts, and my husband loved them. And he's a Pink Floyd guy. He was also an actor, and he loved playing tennis with his friend, Mike Tyberg. Mike Tyberg. Then there was his love of photography. Once when we were at one of his showings, I spied a framed photograph that he had previously shown me. I don't have a Kleenex. It was of a young Russian girl standing in this beautiful park and holding a broom. And she had this sad, faraway look on her face. He just captured. Anyway, I immediately wanted to purchase it, but it said sold on it, which bummed me out. But a few months later, on my birthday, he gave me a gift. The picture. I have it in my sewing room. That's the kind of man he was. I'd like to share just one more memory. When my dad was dying of cancer, Dr. Cagle was there for us, my family and me, the whole time. The day after my dad died, I was laying on my bed with tears in my ears, And he called me up and asked if he could come over. And I said, I'm just not up to it. Maybe tomorrow. And he says, well, this is important. He brought me a freshly baked, warm from the oven, Kahlua cake, my favorite. Like I said, that's the kind of man he was. I'll close with this. He was a kind, compassionate, really fun guy. And Princess Rain in the face is sad.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here today to have the opportunity to share with you some of the fondest recollections of my dear friend, Alan Cagle, whom I first met in February 1976 when I was 23 years old and Alan was 33. Alan and I remained close friends right up until the time of his passing in 2021 for over 45 years. Ours was an unlikely kind of friendship, as our personalities were so completely different. I was a young school teacher at that time, soon to become a professional singer and actress, and I was outgoing, talkative, and loved to meet and get to know new people. And Alan was a very reserved doctor, quiet, shy around strangers, and rarely said anything when he was in a large group. We met when we both auditioned for roles in the chorus in a musical called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying that was being produced at the Downey Civic Light Opera, a beautiful theater there. To my surprise, I was cast in the female lead of Rosemary, and Alan was cast in the role of Mr. Bratt, one of the company executives. Throughout the rehearsal process, we became fast friends because of our mutual love of all things musical theater related. After the show closed, we got season tickets together for all of the musical Broadway national tours that came through LA after they had been done originally in New York. Back in those days, I did not have very much money, but Alan was quite the gastronome, a real foodie before it became fashionable like it was now. He loved looking at menus. He loved discovering new restaurants. He was always looking in the paper for some fabulous review of what the newest hot place was in town. And he always wanted to try them, and they were always really expensive restaurants. But he always told me that he didn't want to go by himself, so he would insist that I go, and that he always pay for my restaurant meal, which was very, very sweet. Theater. We saw some absolutely fantastic theater together through the years, but Alan was always really concerned when a character in the cast said a swear word or used an expletive during the course of the show. At intermission or after the show, he would say to me, I'm so sorry about the language. And I assured him each time that it was fine. I wasn't a shrinking violet, and I had heard some of those swear words before. I'm going to be okay and not to stress about it. In 1976, the first national touring company of the Pulitzer Prize-winning musical, A Chorus Line, came out to Los Angeles at the Shubert Theater for an 18-month long run. It centered on the story of 17 Broadway dancers who were auditioning for spots on a Broadway chorus line. I had heard through the grapevine, because of course in those days there wasn't the internet, you couldn't look at it ahead of time, you couldn't listen to it ahead of time. I had heard that the language in one particular song was extremely sexual and explicit, even for 1976. And I knew he would be horribly embarrassed sitting next to me when some of those words were sung from the stage. So I thought, well, what could I possibly do to try to head this off at the pass and somehow find a copy of the lyrics so I could tell him about it and he could be prepared and wouldn't be so embarrassed? Well, I went to Maury's Music Store in Long Beach, a well-known institution, to see if they had a copy of the score. And I actually read what was going to come out of the actor's mouth. Now, this is the copy of the vocal selection score that I got. So they had it. I bought it. It was eye-popping in more ways than one. The song with the most explicit lyrics was one called Dance 10, Looks 3, where the dancer on her dance card, every time she auditions, is such a fantastic dancer, they always give her 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. But on her looks, which in the theater is a very important part of whether you get work or not, she always got a 3. And she felt that was so unfair. So, she would look at other girls on the line and she would hear these stories about how they used to go up to a doctor on Park and 73rd, a plastic surgeon, and come back with just these incredible bodies. And so that's what she decided to do. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole song because I don't want anybody to be offended, but the first part of it was, and the part of the story I really like is, I got this score, and I told Alan that I was going to read it to him, the parts that he might really worry about in the car on the way up to the Schubert. I didn't know at that time, of course, that I would be performing at the Schubert Theater for a couple of years in a national tour myself. It was when the Schubert was newly built, and it was pretty fantastic. So he picked me up in one of his new cars, as has been said. Every year, he always got a new car, every 2-3 years. So every single time I was with him, which was hundreds of times over the course of our friendship, his car always had the new car smell, which I just thought was so cool. And of course, he was a very, very careful driver. So I had brought with me this book and a little pen flashlight so I could read him the lyrics in the car on the way up because the light in the roof of the car wasn't enough. So here we are. I'm 23, he's 33, and I'm reading to him, Dance 10 looks 3, and I'm still on unemployment, dancing for my own enjoyment. That ain't it, kid, that ain't it, kid. Dance 10 looks 3 is like to die. Left the theater and called the doctor for my appointment to buy. And you'll just have to use your imagination, although I will take this into the reception area. Because, of course, these words are used, it's ubiquitous now. But back then, you never said those words in polite company. So she talks about, her nose and her this and her that. And then she was just a huge success and gets cast in everything. And it was one of the seminal songs. And I look back on that now, because at the time, both Alan and I were just so completely virginal. And here I am in his car with the flashlight and this thing, and I'm reading all of these words because I'm so worried about him being upset about them. But we looked back on that and laughed about that many, many times. Singer. Some of you have heard that Alan was quite the singer himself. He was a tenor in the prestigious William Hall Chorale and performed with them internationally in Australia and Russia. And when I became an alto soloist here at Bayshore Church, I told him what an amazing and professional choir it was, and that if he wouldn't mind driving down the commute from Whittier to Long Beach every week, that he might enjoy joining the choir. And you heard earlier about the first time that he had been here. Well, he took to that like a duck to water, and had many very, very happy and satisfying years singing in the choir for multiple kinds of services and events. And as you heard, he became church treasurer for several years. Sports. Alan loved the game of tennis. For years, he played in a regular foursome 3 times a week, first thing in the morning with friends up in the Whittier area. Whenever Wimbledon was broadcast on TV, he would not leave his house and he would not answer the phone because he didn't want to miss 1 second of the broadcast. So I knew not to call him when Wimbledon was on. One year he actually flew to England for the Wimbledon tennis finals, which he enjoyed tremendously. And I find it very ironic that today are the finals of Wimbledon. Wimbledon is playing as we meet here. Today's the women's final and also the gentlemen's doubles final today. So I know that Alan from up there is looking down and has one of the best seats in the house, and I hope he realizes that we are here talking about how wonderful he is and can tear himself away from the finals game to really listen in today. Clothes. Alan believed in the axiom, clothes make the man. He was a very snappy dresser and had the most amazing collection of gorgeous suits, shirts, and especially ties, many of which had an Art Deco theme. The last day that I saw him in person, the day before he moved from Whittier to Northern California, he gave me 3 of his ties, which I treasure. He also loved following the latest fashion trends for men and was one of the first men I knew who was comfortable wearing a pink dress shirt, which was unheard of at the time. And he wore that beloved pink shirt so often that I started calling him Mr. Pip for perfect in pink. So we used to always get a kick out of it. I would address his, when I sent him something, to Mr. Pip, and then it was also ABC, MD, and all of these other, so it just kept getting longer and longer with all of these memories. And the only reason that my own dad ever bought a pink shirt was because he said, if Alan is wearing a pink shirt, then I guess it's okay for me to wear one too. As you've heard, Alan loved to travel the world for pleasure, theater, to sharpen his love of photography. The exhibition that he had of his work at the Long Beach Playhouse was really spectacular. And to be in a place that was actually an exhibition room with all of his beautiful stuff up there was very emotional for me. He also traveled the world to see all kinds of theater by himself or often with me or with other friends. We went to the Ashland Shakespeare Festival in Oregon, which was the first time that I learned about his desire to move up there after he retired. His ultimate goal was to permanently move to Rogue Valley Manor in Medford, a delightful, high-end senior residence in anticipation of many of his family members deciding to move up there together after their respective retirements. And I know a lot of you now have moved up there. And by the way, I've heard about you folks my whole life, and I have never seen you except for the sisters. It is just so cool to have you here. Oh, yes, and you too. Yes, I could only see you from the side. Hi. Yeah, please come up to me at the reception so I can just give you a hug and tell you what a special man he was in my life. It's wonderful to have you all here today. So anyway, he decided he wanted to move up to Rogue Valley. We also went to New York City to see the latest Broadway shows, a trip to London to see the West End shows, and also Hawaii with my good friend Dee Dee Gilmore, who is here today. One thing, and I'm sure the family is aware of this, Alan always respected authority. If somebody was in a position of authority and said something, Alan always wanted to follow it. So this is a quick story about the London trip. There were about 25 of us that went on a theater trip to London to see about 6 or 7 shows and all the sights and everything else like that. It was in November, and it was the coldest November on record. It was like 36, 34 degrees at night with snow on the ground. So we had just returned on a Wednesday night from seeing one of the West End shows, and everybody, went to bed, and we were all set to get up and go have high tea the next day. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, this is what I hear. Meep, meep, meep. "This is a fire alarm. Please leave your rooms immediately and make your way outside of the hotel." And that was like repeated every minute. Well, of course, it sent me, and I'm sure everybody into the hotel, into a complete panic. But I thought, well, I got to get out of here right away. Where is the fire? And I was just in my 90s, so I thought I just can't go outside in my 90s. So I put on some jeans and shoes and grabbed my coat, ran to the door, and then realized I didn't even have my contact lenses in. I wouldn't be able to see, so went back in, put my contact lenses in, ran down 7 flights of stairs because I didn't know if there was the fire in the elevator. You know, your heart is just going and you're living totally in the moment. Well, there's scores of people, you know, running through the lobby, running outside and standing out in front. And when I get there, who is standing there? Obviously, who was the very first one out, in his pajamas with no shoes. So he's standing there on the snow, first on his right foot, then on his left foot, then on his right foot, then on his left foot, because it was so cold. And he forgot to take his glasses, so he couldn't see anything. But that's Alan, you know. If somebody told him it was important for him to do something, he was going to go. So I asked the concierge, or the doorman, and he said, yeah, he was the first one out here. And he was here for like at least 5 minutes before anybody else in the hotel came out. So I thought you might enjoy that story. Handwriting. Okay, can we talk? I mean, you always hear the whole, you know, thing about doctors having small handwriting. I mean, I'm not talking a 1/4 inch. I'm not talking an 1/8 of an inch. I'm talking teeny, 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 teeny little letters that he wrote in. So when he would, you know, send a letter to me, my whole address was like this big, you know, because he had written it so small. I used to kid him about that mercilessly. But one of his most endearing qualities was that he often sent me greeting cards that expressed his love and appreciation for me in a way that he would never feel comfortable actually saying to me in person, because that's just not the kind of person that he was. Time after time, he sent me the most thoughtful, amazing cards, and I have saved several of them. But my favorite one I want to tell you about, it's from over 30 years ago. And on the front, it said, on a scale of 1, and then there was a picture of a plate of turnips, to 10, and then there was a picture of macaroni and cheese, and then you flip to the inside of the card, you are an 11, which is an ice cream sundae with a huge sundae. And I was so touched by that, you know, because he would never say that to me in person, but he was always, you know, indicating his love and appreciation of me with all the cards that he sent. So when I look back and I marvel how we had such a strong and lasting friendship and we were so fundamentally different, I was really sad that he was going to move to Rogue Valley in Oregon when he retired, but it was something that he had talked about for years. And I think it was very brave of him, being such a shy person, to be willing to move up there before the family even moved up there, because he only knew one resident in Rogue Valley. The last time that I saw him was at a lunch we had on the day before he moved from his beloved home in Whittier up north. I was concerned because he wouldn't know anybody at this new senior residence, and he was so shy and would be there all by himself. So we talked about ways to start conversations with people that he didn't know. So I was trying to get him to say, okay, so you sit down at a table and there's a couple there. What are the kinds of things that you might say to them to get them to start talking? Because otherwise he would just go to a table all by himself because he was so shy. So together that last day, we wrote down about 10 questions of topics that he could use as a reference for getting a good conversation started, which he folded in a teeny, teeny, teeny little thing and put in his wallet. Unfortunately, right after he moved to Oregon, the COVID pandemic struck, and no one at the complex was allowed to go out of their rooms for meals or any special activities. He became ill and passed away shortly afterwards. And I really regret that he never got to experience Rogue Valley Manor fully after anticipating it for so long. And so in closing, I hope I've shared with you some of the things that perhaps you didn't know about Alan. He was always a constant in every stage of my life, and I miss him terribly. It's comforting to me to know that he's interred here at Bayshore, and I will feel like his spirit continues to be close to me. I'm also comforted that heaven has a new resident in our dear Alan. Now that he's there, he undoubtedly is watching theater greats like Laurence Olivier perform Shakespeare, and he's definitely playing tennis several times a week. You know, does anybody ever lose a game up in heaven? I don't know, something to think about. And since I imagine one would never gain weight once you get up in heaven, he'll be able to eat to his heart's desire, which foodie that he was, and diets that we went on and off together again and again, will tickle him pink because he can eat anything now. Godspeed, dear Helen. I'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
Still morning. Good morning again. And again, thank you all for being here. If you're able, could I ask you to stand up, please? You may be seated. I've always wanted to do that in a church. Thank you. Sorry. I am Mike, the nephew. I just wanted to share a few random thoughts about my cool uncle. Before I start, I should say I should have gone first. You never follow the valedictorian. So, I'm what, 37? So picture me as a 5-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old. Starting about Bud's various names. You all probably know him as Alan or Dr. Cagle. There was a period there, and it's been mentioned, that he was known by Snoop Docky. My kids call him the silent domino warrior. Val will expand on that later. Oh, by the way, the picture in the brochure, the lower left corner, that's the smirk of a silent domino warrior right there. But to me, he was always Uncle Bud. Bud was my cool uncle. I remember when Val and I were kids, very young, we would go to see Uncle Bud first in Palo Alto when he was at Stanford, and then later in San Francisco when he was at UCSF. A visit with Bud in Palo Alto always meant ice cream at the Town and Country Village. And later in San Francisco when he was at UCSF, that visit usually meant Chinatown and maybe a new toy if we were good. I didn't realize at the time, but despite Bud's insane hospital schedule, he always found time to show us around, take us to the cafeteria and the bookstore. A few years ago, I was at UCSF Parnassus Hospital visiting Cheryl's dad, and I stepped into the hallway, or the stairwell rather, to go up to the cafeteria, and boom, the smell of that stairwell took me back 50 plus years. I couldn't believe it. I even told Cheryl about it. Those were fond memories of Bud, even as a 4 or 5 year old. After Bud became a doctor, he moved south. The problem was a time and distance equation. We were always separated by a great distance and so busy with no time to visit anyway. We did enjoy trips to Whittier every couple of years for Thanksgiving and or Christmas. I maybe shouldn't admit this, but one trip, Bud took us to the hospital and showed us the lab where the body parts were kept in jars. Talk about an impression on a young person. 10% gross and 90% cool. Another time that stuck for whatever reason as an impression on a young person, I stayed with Bud at his home down the hill from Grandma and Grandpa Cagle's house. I'm staring at this device on his piano to which Bud introduced me to the metronome, and that it was used to keep the timing of a musical rhythm. Never knew that. I guarantee you that I was the only kid on my block with that kind of knowledge. Bud was always a snappy dresser, as you mentioned, and straight out of GQ magazine. And he taught me that you can never be overdressed for an event. I can't remember the function, but Bud was the one who taught me how to properly tie a necktie, standing in front of the mirror on Ambar in Fremont, going over and over half Windsors and full Windsors. I still think of that moment every time I get dressed up. Although you wouldn't know it, Bud being the model citizen that he was and me being the black sheep, we had more in common than you would think. He played tennis and I played baseball. He enjoyed cycling. I like sports cars. He sang in a church choir and I sang to Van Halen records in the shower. We did share a healthy common hobby in photography, and Unc had a creative eye, which I tried to emulate, and wow, could he capture those images. They were very cool. My gallery is a couple of walls in the hallway back by the back bedroom, but you have all borne witness to Bud's photos and how proud we all were of his gallery. Throughout my life, I watched how Bud was always doing for others, always giving, striving to be the best. He was always there to help, set up, make food, tie ties, give advice. Looking back, he likely sacrificed a great deal to stay close with his folks and eventually provide excellent care for them. Always available for a call asking, "What is this purple thing on my leg?" Or, "Does this look weird to you?" His thoughtfulness transcended his passing as Sharon delivered to us some of Bud's coin collection, which included minted sets of coins from the birth years of my sons, 87, 90, and 93. By the way, my wife Cheryl, sons Nick, Kyle, and Brad. Just wanted to share some random thoughts about my cool uncle. Thank you.
So I just wanted to let you know when Sharon started us out and she had the 6-page letter, single space, typed from Bud to my grandmother and grandfather thanking them. The reason that he typed it is because it would have been 1 page if he had only written it himself. So as Lucy was talking about how small he wrote, we used to have competitions to see which one of us could write the smallest. And despite the fact that my hands were much smaller than his, he still beat me every time. So good morning, and my name is Valerie Stillwell, and I had the privilege to call Alan Bruce Cagle my uncle. Now, I did want to point out, as my brother mentioned, that you had all been calling him by the wrong name. You called him Alan, or Dr. Cagle, his name was Bud, or ABCMD, as it said on his license plate. We also called him Silent Domino Warrior, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. As you've heard from everybody here, my uncle was a true Renaissance man. He had his bases covered in athletics and photography, the arts, his profession, his business acumen, and things like that. I wanted to share a little bit about the behind-the-scenes things that happened to create the man that you all know as Alan Cagle. These are some of his very favorite family stories that many of you might not know about. As most of you might have noticed, Bud was mostly bald. I mean, hair challenged. You might have thought that it was hereditary, but in fact it was not. When my mother, Frances, his sister, was a young girl, she decided she was going to paint her fingernails. She did not have a table, so she used my Uncle Bud's head, which she very carefully put her hands, and then she very carefully put the nail polish bottle, and you can imagine what happened. And being the quick thinker that young Frances was, she quickly grabbed her nail polish remover and scrubbed away at his head to get the nail polish off, and no hair was ever going to grow there again, regardless of what heredity had in store for him. As you probably know, Alan was not much into sports except for tennis, at least not team sports, and for a very good reason. He did start off in Little League. His very first at-bat, they broke his nose. And he never played team sports of any sort ever again, nor did he want to watch them on television. I think it brought back lots of painful memories. He was, however, very, very good and very, very interested in tennis, and you might want to know how he got to be so quick on the tennis court and agile. When he was young, he had wanted to play with the big kids who got to stay up later, including, again, my mom, his sister Frances. And so I don't know if you remember, they're making a resurgence, but the onesies that little guys used to wear, except they had a flap, strategically located in the rear for easy access. Well, Bud would sneak out of bed when it was past his bedtime, and he left his little flap down. And he would run after the big kids with his little fanny flapping in the breeze. And then when he realized he was going to get caught, he flipped a Yui and ran back really, really fast so that he wouldn't get caught and put back to bed. And that is how he got to be so quick on the tennis court. Moving on to college at Stanford, you probably were aware of how very, very homesick he was, especially his first year there. My grandmother used to faithfully, once a month, make him a strudel, his favorite, and mail it to him, care package. He would receive the care packages, and they would make him so sad, and he got so much more homesick, he refused to open them, put them under his bed. So when my grandparents came at the end of his freshman year at Stanford to move him back home for the summer, my grandmother found all of her very carefully made homemade strudels under his bed in various stages of decomposition. I never had the nerve to ask, but I do not think that she ever made him a strudel again, even though he did continue, obviously, at Stanford. That could be an urban legend, by the way, but I don't think that she ever made him another strudel. After Stanford, he went out to medical school at UC San Francisco, and he became rather famous for his precision in all things, as several of you have mentioned, including Pastor Susie. And you might have thought that it came from his medical training, but it did not. It started much earlier in his life with a comb. And if you remember the combs that were this, and then they had the pointy end. So one day, my Aunt Sharon and I were taking much too long to get ready in the morning, so my mom asked Bud, her brother, to please get our hair up in ponytails so that we could leave. So he took that comb out, and he took those rubber bands out, and we had the straightest part from our foreheads to the nape of our necks, and those ponytails were here, and they were never, ever going to come out. And we were like this. And as a matter of fact, Sharon and I have just been able to start blinking just in the past couple of months. So you might have thought that it was his training at medical school, but it in fact was not. It came from that. I believe the term scared straight came from those episodes, but I could be wrong about that. The other thing that you did need to know is that Bud was very, very thoughtful. As was mentioned earlier, he was so kind, he gave my mother a box of Tide every year for Christmas so that she could continue doing his laundry while he was studying at medical school. We all thought it was rather hilarious. I don't know that she thought it was that funny, although I did get a complimentary chuckle out of her, so thank you for that, Mom. Also, he, as you have heard, was very, very thrifty, so I am sure that at least those of you in the medical profession know the little orange specimen boxes. He would not ever get rid of those things. He said they were good boxes, by golly. So it's rather famous in our family. We call them the orange boxes, the dreaded orange boxes, that are still circulating now after all of these years. And if you are the recipient, you guys have them. If you're the recipient of an orange box, he would fit, it didn't matter what, he could get you a stuffed pony. He would shove it into one of those little thin orange boxes and you got it for Christmas. And then it was your duty to pass it on to the next person the next year at Christmas, and you did not want to be the person who ended up with all those orange specimen boxes. And then he became a doctor. While he learned many of his skills in school to help him deal with difficult patients, a few of the skills he learned from our family. Understandably, once he graduated from medical school, his medical opinion was much sought after by everyone in the family, most especially my brother and myself. So in order to protect him, regardless of what the problem was, he had one solution: amputate. Bud, I have a headache. Amputate. Bud, I fell and skinned my knee. Amputate. Bud, I have a stomach. Amputate. So needless to say, we kind of stopped asking. I think Mike must have forgotten that when he called Bud and said, "What's the purple thing on my leg?" Bud probably said amputate. If he didn't say that, he said, "I'm sorry, I'm not on peds today," which the adults in the family thought was hilarious until he said, "I'm not on geriatrics either." Once he had some free time, Alan became very involved in singing, in choirs and choruses and chorales. If you ever attended or participated in any of his performances, I'm sure you noticed his family yelling and screaming and generally being loudly supportive of our dear uncle. Decorum did not stop us from climbing into the tour buses after his performances to say hi to Uncle Bud loudly, much to his embarrassment. He said that he had to endure endless teasing from his fellow performers because of it, but he always said it with a smile on his face. Bud also loved photography and sharing it with the public and with us as a family. We spent many evenings watching slideshows of his latest work and listening to stories of the wonderful people that he met while on his travels to do his photography workshops. Most recently, we all developed a love of playing games together as a family, and we have been playing Trains, the domino game. And here is tying into what Mike had been talking about. We always talked and chatted about life and what we were doing as we were playing the games, and Bud chatted along right with us and paid very little attention to the game, so we thought, right up until he played his last domino and won the game. And my middle nephew, Kyle, dubbed him, to the agreement of Brad and Nick, the silent domino warrior. So ABCMD Gunk, which they called him because he was their great uncle, silent domino warrior, and Snoop Docky. Bud was a thoughtful man, as anybody who has been the recipient of one of his Hallmark cards can attest. He remembered and celebrated every occasion with family and friends, and he would spend hours reading every card to make sure that he picked just exactly the perfect one for the perfect person for the perfect occasion. He was known fondly as the king of cards in his local Hallmark store, and I'm afraid they might have gone out of business after he moved out of the area. Bud loved his family very much, especially his sisters Frances and Sharon. As a matter of fact, he loved them so much, he moved twice in the last 5 years so that he could be closer to them. Uncle Bud was a wonderful man. He was thoughtful and kind and supportive. He was always there to listen and to help. He was gracious and full of life. He was cracking jokes right up to the end. And not sharing his See's candy, by the way, which was another thing. He will be missed. The world is a little less bright today without him in it, but we all have so many fond memories, many of those that you heard today, that will keep us going. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for letting me share a few of our family memories with you. On behalf of our family, we are so grateful to all of you for being here to celebrate Bud's life with us. I know that he is smiling down on us right now and wanting to know where the strudel is. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all so much for sharing those magnificent memories of our dear Alan. As we now move into our time of prayer, if it is part of your faith tradition, I invite you to join with me at the conclusion of my prayer in reciting the Lord's Prayer. Let us pray. God of grace and creator of all that is, you are the giver of all life. You set us each upon this path at our birth and walk with us each day of our earthly journey. And it is now with faith in your grace, your wisdom, and your undying love that we entrust the dear soul of Alan Bruce Cagle to your eternal care. May your holy presence, abiding love, and deep peace surround him. We praise you, O God, for your steadfast love for Alan for all the days of his life. We give you thanks for the intelligent, kind, witty, creative, loving, dedicated, and faithful person he was. As a brother, as an uncle, as a dear friend of many, and so much more. We offer our gratitude for all the ways that Alan blessed those who knew him throughout his years upon this earth. He is dearly loved and is deeply missed. Help us in this time, O God, to remember and trust that the legacy of Alan's spirit will continue to live on in all whose lives he touched. May his life and influence continue to help shape the living of those who love him and all who have learned from him. Eternal God, we are grateful that for Alan, all suffering and sorrow are now ended, that death itself is past, and that he has already entered the home where all your people gather in peace. We trust that Alan's spirit now lives in freedom, abiding with you forevermore. God of all comfort, compassion, and tender care, may your presence continue to surround Alan's beloved family and dear friends. May you be their strength, refuge, and ever-present companion and consolation. May they know the support and care of one another and of community to sustain them. And may all who gather here experience the everlasting light and hope we have in you, for this life and for the next. And may we know your comfort and guidance along the way. Our thanks and praise we offer to you, gracious God, who leads us all from death to everlasting life with deep and abiding love and grace that surpasses all human understanding. All of our prayers we offer to you in the name of Jesus, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Before we conclude, I once again would like to invite you to join us next door for the reception, to greet Alan's family, and to continue to share your own remembrances. After the benediction, I will escort the family out, and then you are welcome to join us just next door over in the fellowship hall. And now, as you go forth from this service, may the steadfast love of God surround you and uplift you. May the peace of Christ sustain you. And may the fellowship of the Holy Spirit bring you comfort and inspiration now and forevermore. Amen.